Trump's tariffs face crucial court test. What's at stake? Trump's tariffs face crucial court test as deadline approaches. President Donald Trump's global tariff regime is now in the spotlight as a high-stakes legal battle unfolds over the eve of its latest deadline. The case, set to begin at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, will feature a panel of 11 judges in Washington, D.C., who will hear arguments from the Trump administration and two small businesses challenging the legality of many of his import duties. Trump's sweeping tariffs, which are set to go into effect Friday, were delayed in April due to market volatility. Since then, he has announced a range of tariff levels with around 12 trading partners, many of which mirror the rates he threatened to impose in early April, though some are higher and a few slightly lower. These tariffs, targeting major economies like Canada, Mexico, China, the European Union, Japan, India, Brazil, and others, have been deployed under the law. The National Retail Federation reported in June that businesses are struggling with unpredictable tariff policies, making it nearly impossible to forecast costs, place orders, or manage supply chains. Retailers, who typically plan 6 to 9 months in advance for seasonal demand, are now scrambling to adapt to rapidly shifting rules. Retailers usually plan their inventories 6 to 9 months in advance to meet seasonal demand. However, unpredictable and rapidly changing tariff policies are making it nearly impossible to forecast costs, place orders, and manage supply chains effectively. The Federation stated, two companies, VOS Selections Inc., a wine and spirits importer, and Plastic Services and Products, a pipe and fittings company, sued Trump over his use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, of 1977. They argued that Trump had no authority to impose across-the-board worldwide tariffs without congressional approval. The court initially blocked the tariffs in late May, citing a lack of identifiable limits, and finding that the law Trump cited in many executive orders did not grant him unbounded tariff authority. The court also ruled that the tariffs did not meet the unusual and extraordinary risk standard required for emergency declarations. The White House defended the tariffs in May, claiming they created a national emergency that impacted American communities and weakened the defense industrial base. However, the company's legal filings emphasized that Congress has never delegated such power, and Trump's justification for the tariffs fails to meet the IEEPA standards. IEEPA nowhere mentions tariffs, duties, imposts, or taxes, and no other president in the statute's nearly 50-year history has claimed that it authorizes tariffs. The company stated in a filing with the appeals court, the court battle could leave consumers and businesses in a bind for much of the year. While the current ruling does not directly affect tariffs implemented under other laws, such as 10% steel tariffs on the UK and 50% steel and aluminum duties on global partners, these tariffs were already in place under the Trade Act of 1974 and the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. The companies also argue that such broad tariffs would devastate small businesses across the U.S. The judge panel is unlikely to rule this week, with the losing party likely appealing to the Supreme Court. The lingering uncertainty could continue to weigh on consumers and businesses. The lawsuit is not the only challenge Trump's tariffs face. At least a dozen other lawsuits are underway or in early stages. In a recent case involving an orange juice importer, the company warned that prices could soar by up to 25% for U.S. consumers, citing a trade deficit that, according to Trump, is actually a surplus. However, the tariff was primarily driven by political factors, including the treatment of former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro and tech companies like Elon Musk's X. Even if the court blocks Trump's tariffs, the administration still has several options to maintain them. Trump could instruct the Commerce Secretary and U.S. trade representatives to launch investigations under Section 301 of the 1974 Trade Act, allowing tariffs to be imposed after an investigation concludes. Alternatively, he could use Section 232 of the 1962 trade law, which he is already employing for steel and aluminum duties. A lesser-known law, Section 338 of the 1930 Trade Act, allows the president to impose up to 50% tariffs on imports from countries that discriminate against the U.S. Goldman Sachs's chief economist Alec Phillips noted that this authority, which has never been used before, limits tariffs but does not require a formal investigation. Experts warn that Trump's approach risks undermining U.S. economic stability. The president has many other tools to coerce states and pursue his objectives, including expanding sanctions and export controls, wrote Chatham House senior fellow Max Yoli and Chicago Council on Global Affairs president Leslie Vinya-Murray. Negotiating formal trade deals remains a possibility, but most of what Trump and his administration have called deals are more of a framework agreement than a real pact. Despite this, formal trade deals typically take years to finalize due to the complexity of global economies. The U.S. alone has over 12,000 tariff categories among 200 trading partners, according to UBS. Congress could approve any formal deal without judicial intervention. Correction, a previous version incorrectly stated that the Federal Appeals Court panel would hear arguments in New York. The actual location is Washington, D.C. Trump's emergency powers, a legal challenge. Trump declares emergencies left and right. Can judges stop him? Washington. President Trump seems to see emergencies around every corner of the United States, and this broad use of emergency powers is creating a slew of difficulties for federal courts to navigate. Since the start of his second term, Trump has issued numerous presidential proclamations, stating that the country faces crises which necessitate him taking drastic measures that bypass typical governmental procedures. This strategy allows him to act unilaterally and avoid the unpredictability of trying to pass laws through Congress. But here's where it gets controversial. Many question whether these are true emergencies or just a means to consolidate power. And this is the part most people miss. The courts are now in the tough position of deciding if and how to rein in the president's use of emergency declarations. Do you think Trump is overstepping his authority by declaring so many emergencies? Or are these legitimate crises that require swift action? Share your thoughts in the comments. Trump's 5 options if courts rule sweeping tariffs unlawful. Imagine a world where the rules of global trade are turned upside down, and the consequences are felt by economies and businesses around the globe. This is the reality we're facing today, as the Trump administration's aggressive tariff regime hangs in the balance. But here's where it gets controversial. What happens is the courts rule that these sweeping tariffs are unlawful. The implications are far-reaching and the stakes are high. To understand the potential fallout, let's take a step back and look at how we got here. President Donald Trump has been using emergency powers to impose import taxes, a move that has been met with resistance from federal courts. In May, 2 federal courts ruled that the Trump administration had wrongfully invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to justify reciprocal duties targeting America's trading partners, as well as separate levies aimed at China, Canada, and Mexico. The Trump administration has appealed both decisions, with oral arguments for one case scheduled for July 31st at the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. But what are the potential next steps for the Trump administration if the courts ultimately rule that the tariffs are unlawful? There are several options on the table, each with its own set of consequences. And this is the part most people miss. The outcome of this saga will have a significant impact on the global economy, and it's essential to understand the potential implications. As we delve into the possible scenarios, it's crucial to consider the complexities of international trade and the potential repercussions of each option. The first option is to repeal the tariffs altogether, which would likely be met with relief from trading partners and businesses affected by the tariffs. However, this move could also be seen as a defeat for the Trump administration, which has been adamant that the tariffs are necessary to protect American industries. The second option is to renegotiate the tariffs, which could involve revising the terms of the tariffs or exempting certain countries or industries. This approach would require careful diplomacy and negotiation, as the Trump administration would need to balance the interests of various stakeholders. The third option is to appeal the court's decision to the Supreme Court, which would add another layer of complexity to the already contentious issue. This move would likely be met with resistance from trading partners and could lead to further escalation of the trade war. The fourth option is to use alternative legal justifications for the tariffs, such as the Trade Act of 1974, which grants the president broad authority to impose tariffs in response to unfair trade practices. However, this approach would require careful consideration of the legal implications and could be subject to further court challenges. The fifth option is to impose new tariffs under a different legal authority, such as the Section 232 National Security Provision, which has been used in the past to impose tariffs on steel and aluminum imports. This move would likely be met with resistance from trading partners and could lead to further retaliation. As we consider these options, it's essential to ask, what are the potential consequences of each scenario, and how will they impact the global economy? But here's the question on everyone's mind. Will the Trump administration ultimately prevail in its efforts to impose sweeping tariffs? Or will the court strike down the tariffs as unlawful? The answer to this question will have far-reaching implications for businesses, economies, and trade relationships around the world. And this is where we invite you to join the conversation. Do you think the Trump administration's tariff regime is justified? Or do you believe it's a misguided approach that will ultimately harm the global economy? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And let's discuss the potential implications of this critical issue.